Welcome back, Geordies. It's Adam from Two for Joy. I'm going to be talking about the most boring topic in football, FFP to PSR to now SCR. But before we do, if you see me squeal, sigh or jump out of my chair at any point during this video, it is because I've done my back in at work and I'm in I was in an unbelievable amount of pain. But fortunately for me, my wife is a nurse and she has administered me some strong painkillers to help me through this video. So hopefully we will get to the point of this very, very quickly. And I don't want to make this boring. I want to make it quite interesting. I want to give you probably the facts of what really matter to Newcastle with this new SCR, squad cost ratio, and what it actually means for us going into this summer transfer window, or what I can only assume it means for us going into this transfer window. Because for me, FFP, PSR, SCR, or they're all FFS, another financial regulation put in place to stop Newcastle from being able to compete, in my opinion. But before I do, I will say I watched a fantastic podcast from the Football Boardroom with Henry Winter and Christian Perslow called What Next for Newcastle. I'll link it in the description. If you get, I think it's like half an hour, 40 minutes. If you get the chance, watch it. It's really interesting how Christian Perslow, former Liverpool and Villa sporting director, goes through essentially how the rules were brought in to stop Newcastle and PIF, and essentially how these rules, while they keep changing, they are there only to benefit the big six, the traditional big six, and there to make it almost impossible for the clubs the likes of Newcastle, Aston Villa and the chasing pack to compete financially. So we'll go through SCR. So, squad cost ratio. A new financial regulation passed by the Premier League in November 2025 that will fully replace the existing profit and sustainability, PSR, starting from 2026-27 season. It's designed to directly limit the amount a club can spend on the playing squad, wages, transfer fees and agents fees based on a percentage of its revenue. So they call it the 85% rule. And that means that Premier League clubs are generally allowed to spend a maximum of 85% of their football-related revenue on squad costs. And squad costs is essentially player wages, salaries, head coach, your management, senior and technical staff wages, transfer fees, agent fees. It's like the whole thing just broiled into one. And essentially, if you make it into Europe, there is a UEFA alignment where they bring that down to 70%. So the rule is designed to work parallel with UEFA's financial regulation, which is a stricter 70% cap for clubs participating in European competitions. So this may benefit us or not benefit us depending on where we finish in the Premier League this season. But what's excluded from these things, and this is where it becomes interesting for Newcastle, is what's excluded is the infrastructure investments such as stadium and training ground, which is a big one as I see for next season. It's an ideal opportunity, an ideal time. The women's team operational costs and the academy and youth team operational costs. So it does mean we'd be able to invest more in our stadium, whether we decide to move or expand St James's. Our training ground, which definitely needs an overhaul and needs something to be put in place fairly soon. And I believe this is why Newcastle have been waiting around this this scenario, and the academy and youth team setup. The interesting thing about this is PSR has a 3-year rolling period where you can get, if you go over your £115 million leeway, you end up being deducted points or fined, or if you're Man City, you just hide it in the back of the cupboard and we wait 10 years to find out what actually went on. But this new squad cost ratio means that it will be monitored mid-season and basically throughout a season as it develops, with a major checkpoint on March 1st, allowing faster enforcement of penalties. And there's a very awkward, strange, which I don't quite understand, but if you're slightly over the threshold, they call it a green threshold, and you will be fined money. And then if you're a fair way over the threshold, they'll call it a red threshold, and you'll be deducted points automatically. That will be interesting to see how that actually works out. But interestingly, so I went through, obviously, Manchester City, the highest revenue in the country, the highest wage payers, but I wanted to see what the difference was. So the total revenue for Manchester City for the year ending June 25, the club reached £694 million as a total revenue. And Newcastle, for the same year, reached £314 million in revenue. And then when I look at and I'll throw this up on the screen, the wage costs for the squads, obviously Manchester City, top of the pile, spending £4.2 million a week with an annual wage spend of £222 million. And that is only 58% of their revenue. So they can push this as far as they like and still be under that 70%. I mean, realistically, they could bring in 2 more, 3 more Haalands and still carry on as the way they are, which is absolutely criminal. And obviously, Newcastle sit down there in 8th with 2.2 a week, £2 million a week less than Man City, and spending 116 million a year. Obviously, like £100 million less in wages in a year, and that is estimated to be 72% of our annual turnover on wages. So it's a really fine margin. Should Newcastle make it into Champions League or European football this year, we'd actually be 2% over our wage spend. And this just absolutely fucking baffles me, because if you want sustainability, there is nothing more sustainable than $1 trillion investment fund from one of the wealthiest sovereign nations in the world. So there is nothing that can be said here to say this has anything to do with sustainability. All this has to do with is limiting the ability of smaller clubs being able to compete with the mainstays that have been there for years, the more established hierarchy and order of football, which in my opinion is just absolute bollocks. So interestingly, when I looked at it previously, Manchester City, their revenue is £359 million a year more than Newcastle's, which ironically is more than PIF paid for the football club. It's more than they paid to buy Newcastle Football Club. And I just find this staggering. But while we're on the subject, and it's the want-aways, and this is where it really interested me, is when we move through to player wages and how much each player earns, and essentially, I shouldn't say the want-aways, players that have been linked with moves away in the summer, being Anthony Gordon, Sandro, Bruno, and even links for Joel Linton out to Saudi and stuff. But they are our 4 highest earners. So Bruno on 160, Sandro on 150, Joel Linton on 150, Anthony Gordon on 150. If you were to take, even if you were to take two of those players, if we were to sell, let's say, if I had to pick, I'd probably go Sandro and Gordon. If you were to take those two wages, £300,000 a week on wages, it would allow Newcastle a lot more room to bring in players on a more amenable wage that may not be the big names, the big stars that we might want to push for, but it would allow us more room in this new SCR format. But it moves me on to my point. I'll just quickly touch on this. When I went through the list, this really baffled me. Lewis Miley is on £30,000 a week. And let me just find him. Arsenal. Max Dowman at Arsenal at 15 years old is on £35,000 a week. So you've got a 35-year-old youth prospect on £35,000 a week. A 15-year-old youth prospect on £35,000 a week. And Lewis Miley, who I would say is having his breakout season, who is really coming into his own, could well be a mainstay in the Newcastle squad, is on £30,000 a week. I looked through these the wage structure at Newcastle, and I can understand. I looked Tino Livramento, £50,000 a week. There are clubs out there that will offer. I mean, Arsenal's Ben White is on £150,000 a week. He's on £100,000 a week more than Tino Livramento. And this is where I feel Newcastle will lose players through not being able to offer these ridiculous wages from these ridiculous turnovers that are overinflated. And realistically, Man City have, they've got 115 charges against them for a reason. And while they'll all, I know City fans will all sit there and say, no, we're innocent, we're innocent. We're innocent until proven guilty. There's no smoke without fire. That's all I'd say. But what it brings me on to is David Hopkinson and his trajectory for this club, and saying that he would like Newcastle to push, sky's the limit, we're on a rocket, we want to go to the moon. Realistically, the big deal for Newcastle over the next 2 seasons is securing major sponsorship, whether that's training ground, training kit, stadium, whatever they can, securing big sponsorships for this football club to grow this revenue. I mean, realistically, to compete, you need to double our revenue. An almost impossible task. But we need to be in the 70%. We need to be earning 70% of Man City's or Arsenal's or Liverpool's turnover in order to give us at least a chance of keeping some of our players. And you can understand when Bruno, our captain, our highest earner, is the 44th highest paid player in the Premier League, and the 43 players above him all belong to Big Six teams, traditional Big Six teams. It's just absolutely ridiculous. It feels like a scam and a scandal. But like I say, let me know in the comments what you think. Let me know if you think Newcastle will sell many players in this summer window. I mean, I personally feel like there'll be 2 of our top 4 earners go this window, come in this summer window. Who that will be, you're never quite sure. But if you like the video, be sure to give me a thumbs up. Make sure you stay tuned. Plenty more to come. And hopefully, guys, I will see you in the next one.